All right, joining me right now to discuss is Tim Alexander, a civil rights attorney and a former detective who had a 27-year career in law enforcement after being a victim of police brutality as a teenager himself. He's also running for a U.S. House Senate seat as a Democrat in New Jersey. And we'll talk more about your story, your journey, and how you've been shaped in a moment. But first, I would love to get your reaction to all that we just saw.
It was deplorable. It truly was deplorable. And it's important to point out that the vast majority of law enforcement officers in this country, men and women, are outstanding citizens that do a great job and they provide service to their community. These two officers, particularly the contact officer, that's the person who had the most contact with the second lieutenant, does not need to do another day on the streets of that community. He was emotionally hijacked, he lost his bearings, and it was a motor vehicle stop. And I would question, would he have acted that way if the driver of that vehicle was a 65, 70-year-old white woman? And my answer is no.
And it's extraordinary because what we heard from the officer on that videotape, a lot of it very incriminating, right? Because he even said, you know, I understand looking for a well-lit area, but the majority of the time, something to the effect of it being minorities, and then also rather threatening language, right? I mean, it could be worse if you want to keep sparring with me, essentially, or we can just let it go. I mean, this only makes the matters even worse as it comes down to this lawsuit that has been filed and how the city, the police department might try to explain, and the officers might try to explain this away.
And thank God there was video to support what actually happened, because if it was just those officers' version of the events, we wouldn't even hear about this situation. It'd just be a second lieutenant who was arrested for failing to obey the police. But thank God for video. And that, by the way, took me back to my own incident back in 1985.
Tell me about
when
that.
I was shot at. Sure, I was shot at, arrested, and beat up by the police. And it wasn't until the next day when we were in court that one of the city attorneys representing the town came to me and said, oh, this is a huge mistake. If you just sign this release, we'll downgrade this and it'll all go away. Thank God I had my grandfather with me who had the wherewithal to say he's not signing anything. We have an attorney, and it worked out greatly for me. I was able to go on and have a wonderful law enforcement career and to try to affect change from within.
And how often do you think that has happened with the signing of the release and people then consequently becoming trapped, and especially in cases where they did nothing wrong, and then now they've signed that acknowledgement and can never really shake it for the rest of their lives?
Far too often. And we know that our criminal justice system is broken, that sometimes innocent people, just because they don't think they can win their case, agree to things that they did not do. And it occurs way too often in our criminal justice system. And by the way, if it happens once, and we know it happened in 1985 and it happened again there, it's way, way too often.
Okay, so then you said that precipitated, in a strange way, your experience precipitated your interest in going into law enforcement, and that's so perplexing because some people would think you were so turned off by your experience that no way. What enticed you then to go into law enforcement? What was your ambition along the way?
Although I was only 18, 19 years old at the time, I had already expressed and took steps to join law enforcement. But that incident happened while I was my father passed away, and my grandfather and I were trying to take care of his funeral arrangements. And after all that happened, I really was dejected, and I didn't feel as though law enforcement was going to be my career choice. And it was my grandfather who actually said, you are a far better person than these men will ever be. You have the opportunity here to be a police officer if that's what you want to do, and you will be a much better police officer than they could ever hope to be. And that's why I pursued it.
This video and this story, and even you sharing more about your personal story, all coming in the midst of the nation gripped with this Derek Chauvin trial and his actions under the microscope, and hearing police chief and fellow colleagues testify that the decisions he made were unwarranted and wrong. Listen to what an attorney for George Floyd family said yesterday, last night, and this also on the precipice of Ben Crump telling me that one of the family members of George Floyd will be testifying as early as this week. But listen to this.
Well, I think that tells the world just how egregious this conduct was, that the old playbook of the blue wall of silence can't even be used. And, for the family and the legal team and the world, when you look at all the officers who have come to testify against Derek Chauvin, top-notch experts who are testifying for free, you ask yourself, if a white officer cannot be convicted of killing a black man under these circumstances, when can an officer be convicted?
So tell me about your point of view on what is usually the blue wall of silence, how in this case, that wall has been permeated to a degree, and all juxtaposed with your personal experience in law enforcement and that wall of silence.
Sure, and take that in a particular point. Of course, you have a parade of police officers coming in. I can't say of course. It's highly likely that Chauvin will be convicted because of that. And that's what's needed. We need to retrain police officers to have the courage and conviction to recognize a criminal is a criminal, regardless of what his or her profession is. In this instance, it's working. The police officers are coming in from the chief on down. This is not law enforcement. This was not a proper use of force. This was murder, plain and simple. We need more officers to do the same thing. And throughout my career, I took that stance. Some other officers did. Some other officers did not. I want to see a point where if you and I are police officers and we make an arrest and I break the law in the process, after that issue is resolved, you then turn to me and say, now you're under arrest. Because that's when we will have a perfect police force.
And how will this all now equip you as you run for that Democratic House seat in New Jersey?
I have already framed out a retraining program. I want to blow up police training. I want to put some money with it to get it out to the departments that they have to recognize what the problem is. We have some solutions we're going to work through, push it out, and totally revamp how we put brand new officers into communities, particularly communities that don't look like them and they've never had interaction with.
Tim Alexander, pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.